My name is Huy Pham, Preservation Program Director for the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, and I'm here today to introduce the application walkthrough for the Historic Theater Capital Grant Program, which is a program out of the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, and they have graciously allowed us to manage the program under contract with them. And that's why you're talking to me today. My contact information is on the screen. This presentation will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube for your revisiting. So feel free to take notes, ask questions in the chat, and let's get on with the show. So a little bit of background about the Historic Theater Capital Grant Program, or Historic Theater Grant Program for short, even though I just took out one word. The program started really in 2008 when there was a historic theater survey conducted by the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. And that survey, which is, as a result, produced a booklet about the preservation needs of historic theaters in the state of Washington. At that time, they surveyed 80 historic theaters, and there's probably a few more by now because that was over 13 years ago. That survey, if you want to check it out, it might include the theaters that you know of or that your network or your friends know of. So feel free to look at that. I'll provide the link later. In that survey, it showed that over $46 million of theater repairs were needed in the state of Washington, specifically to the historic theaters. And furthermore, the COVID-19 pandemic magnified this need as many theaters had closed within the past 2 years. Either they couldn't operate because of social distancing mandates out of public safety, or people just weren't going out because they wanted to maintain that public safety and less attention to historic theaters, to public places. Not only did program and the features of a historic theater were neglected, but subsequently also their physical maintenance. So in late 2020, which resulted in the 2021-2023 biennium, the Washington State capital budget did include approval for $300,000 for theater grant program. And the grant program, like I mentioned, is housed out of the Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, or DAHP for short. You'll hear that name and agency throughout my presentation and along the program as we work closely together through its management. So now that you understand a little bit more about how the theater program came to be, let's talk about what the program actually is. So first we begin with eligible applicants. You can be an owner or a authorized representative of a historic theater. And that means private, commercial, nonprofit, local government, etc. Any operating theater. So then let's go to what it means to be an operating theater or an eligible building that would be grant funded through this program. So it should originally be built as a theater. So we had some early inquiries about, well, my theater's actually adaptive reuse of another building. While those aren't at the top of the priority, there still may be a chance to apply. One, if the building itself is a historic building, and two, if it's in current historic use, there may be some wiggle room. And if you pitch your application well enough, then that might be eligible. But really the heart of the program is for historic theaters that are still operating as theaters. The building should be in need of a capital improvement. So that means a physical repair. And it should also be currently listed or applying to be listed in the Washington Heritage Register or the National Register of Historic Places. And if you have any questions about your building's eligibility on those registers, you should contact Michael Hauser, the state architectural historian for DAHP, before completing this application. And if you find out that you weren't one of the original 80 historic theaters outlined in 2008, you can certainly apply. And as long as you have an application in and Michael gives you a preliminary approval to be listed, then you can certainly go ahead and proceed with the grant application. So remember, historic register first, then historic grant request. Next, we're looking at what are eligible projects. So as I mentioned, it should be a capital project, or some people call it brick and mortar, but otherwise could be understood as a physical repair, physical alteration, physical work. And the categories that we outline in the application is building shell and structure. So that's walls, foundation, roofing. Theater features such as seating, stage, any kind of box offices, any kind of interior decorative work, even carpet, balconies, railing, anything that is specific and iconic to the theater should be highlighted and maintained and preserved. Building systems and utilities, so those are things behind the walls such as air conditioning, electrical, plumbing. If those things need attention and have prevented the best use of the theater, or the theater closing because the electrical needs rewiring, those are definitely projects that we can support. And finally, accessibility improvements. So mainly that speaks to American Disabilities Act requirements, ADA, but also general accessibility. Is the theater blocked off in any kind of way? Is there any kind of collapse that prevented the elevator from working or the front doors, or do you need certain aspects of it to be more approachable, more accessible to all individuals? So what isn't an eligible project would be new construction, additions, or incompatible modifications to a historic structure, or programmatic or administrative projects, like if you need to buy a theater to turn it into an active use theater, or if you need grant funding to help close out a mortgage or a loan or anything like that. Those, or research and surveys, those would not be eligible. However, we can talk about how they can contribute to soft costs in your match requirement later on. So what the program funding looks like is that each applicant or project may be rewarded up to $50,000 of grant funding. So that means that one applicant or one organization can't apply for more than one grant, even if they own multiple theaters. And multiple theaters, or a single theater, can't have multiple people apply for two different projects. Like, hey, you apply for the roof and I'll apply for the seats or something like that. Just put it all in one application. And the match requirement for this program is 25% match for distressed counties, which means it's a unemployment threshold and a general economic vitality threshold as determined by the Employment Security Department, which a link is provided in the application for you to verify if your county is considered a distressed county, or if jurisdiction in which the theater is located in has a population of under 50,000 people, or according to the latest available census data. This specific allocation is because during the survey that we took during the pandemic outlined that over 70,000 or 70% of theaters were of historic theaters were located within these more less populated areas. And therefore, they require a smaller match requirement. For all other applicants, and maybe for short, we can call those bigger cities or maybe non-distressed counties or jurisdictions, should have a 50% match. So here are some examples of the project funding. So if you have a $60,000 project in a distressed county, you would be reimbursed $45,000 at the end of the project. But say you had a project in a larger city or a not distressed county, same project, $60,000, but you would only be reimbursed $30,000 because there is more available funding or more support in that county. So like I said, this program is to help historic theaters, and we noticed that the hardest hit theaters were in distressed or rural populations, and that's why those are the different match thresholds. That's a duplicate slide. So in creating your application and your project, you want to look at your budget and understand the difference between your expenses between match and a reimbursable expense. So to understand that, all work must be completed and paid for upfront, and grants are rewarded as reimbursements after the work is verified. So keep that in mind. Like, you have to have funding and financial support in place to do the work upfront, and then the grant is a reimbursement because it's state dollars and because those are program parameters. You cannot be given the award as cash upfront to then do the project. So keep that in mind. Grants may be used to reimburse cash expenditures related directly to construction after a grant contract has been signed, which at this timeline is looking to be around February. So those would be hard costs, hard construction costs, like hard labor, hard materials, like physical things towards directly to the construction project. Those could be reimbursed as a grant award if they were paid for in cash or, credit or whatever. But what that means is the inverse of that, things that are donated or labor that was volunteered or work that was done after July 1st, 2021, because that's when the biennium starts, and before, say, February 2022, all of that other soft costs or not directly hard costs, not directly reimbursable, those can count towards your match. So when you think about it, cash match is your out-of-pocket expenses that will not be reimbursed, and in-kind match is donated materials, equipment, or volunteer labor, which is a minimum value of $25 an hour up to a professional's market rate. And we can talk more specifically about different funding structures, but for what you need to understand for this section is, first, look up if your county or your jurisdiction meets the 25% match threshold or the 50% match threshold. And then from there, make sure that you have enough cash funding to do the reimbursable section of the grant award, and then whatever else can be paid for in cash or donation or volunteer labor. And for each individual project or theater or applicant, we can certainly have preliminary consultation so I can walk you through how to best pitch your full project, because there's many different ways you can apply and many different financial structures and construction phases for any applicant. Next, we'll look at any other requirements. So just a few small bullet points. A sign acknowledging that it is a Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation grant program must be posted on the structure, and a photo proof submitted to staff during the duration of the construction. So basically there is a sign that you have to put on the building that says, the construction work that you're seeing on the site is due in part from support from the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation using state dollars. And the design is provided to you, and obtaining that sign, going to Kinko's or FedEx or wherever you get your signs made would be a reimbursable expense. So you just budget in like an extra $100 or so to obtain the sign that acknowledges the program funding. You also have to submit quarterly progress reports submitted to staff until the project is complete. So let's say you're requesting re-roofing and you got grant approval for it, but you're not doing it until August of next year. Each quarter, we would check in with you and just say, hey, do you have a contractor lined up? Do you have a timeline lined up? Do you have the money lined up to do it? And a lot of times the progress reports will just say, no progress is made at this time, but we'll begin to, take the work seriously in April. Or yes, at this time we got a contractor, but it won't be until next quarter until we get materials and the work is actually done. A preservation easement must also be filed with the county that the theater is in for 5, 10, or 15-year terms, depending on the grant award amounts. And the preservation easement is just to ensure that you don't demolish or negatively alter the structure without the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation's approval prior to doing that. It's just to make sure that, we don't award $50,000 and then all of a sudden you demolish it next year, or you sell it off to someone who takes all of that historic work out and put in something brand new. Because it is a preservation program, and the funding that we do is to incentivize, good preservation practice utilizing historic spaces. The property owner must also enter into a 10-year maintenance agreement with similar parameters to the preservation easement, and that's tracked through an annual monitoring report submitted to staff. So we would just send out a reminder that says, hey, can you tell us any physical work on the structure within the past year? And you would just tell us, or you would say, actually, next year I'm looking to replace all the windows with my own money and time. Can you make sure that I'm still in compliance with the historic standards within my easement and maintenance agreement? And that's a simple dialogue that we would have after the grant program is complete. And then lastly, the feeder must also provide a minimal public benefit. Now, this section is, catered to our more established grant programs with the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, like barns and cemeteries, where sometimes barns are tucked in the back of a property and no one sees it, no one has access to it, or a cemetery is a private cemetery that the public can't have access to. It's not on the side of a road or a public park. That's where the public benefit really needs to be defined. But with feeders, I'm sure you guys have some kind of audience engagement, whether it's paid screenings where people buy a ticket, or public programming where it's accessible, or a lot of times these historic feeders are located in the heart of a downtown or a main street, and the bare minimum public benefit is that its preservation is visible to the public from the street, and it contributes to the built environment of that downtown or main street. So we won't go too much into that, but if for some reason the feeder is not visible from the public right of way, you must explain how you would provide at least one day of public programming or allow staff to access it for photos and videos towards an educational event. And then, of course, theaters in active use with plenty of public engagement will naturally score higher during the selection process. And then the end of Act 1, understanding the program, I just wanted to provide a timeline of what the program actualization might look like. So the deadline is December 19th, which is about 2 months from now. So get your contractors lined up, get your photos, get all your good descriptions of the building in order. And of course, we'll go through the application so you can find out what you actually need to do. But then grantees will be announced around January 2022. Grant contracts will be signed around February 2022. And then you have about 16 months to get the work done. And then, of course, quarterly progress reports are submitted each 3 months. And then reimbursement can be requested anytime after 1, a photo of the program sign is submitted, 2, the work is completed and photos or a site visit is provided to staff, 3, the expense documents are submitted to staff. That creates your reimbursement packet, including invoices, receipts, canceled checks, etc. Proof of preservation easement filed with the county, and reimbursement may be direct deposit or mailed check and may take between 1 to 4 weeks for processing, depending on how busy we here at the Washington Trust or the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation are. And then finally, after you completed the grant program, you would go into that annual monitoring phase where between 5 to 15 years, we would just email you once a year saying, hey, anything we need to know about within the building. And that is the general timeline. So now that we understand what the program is looking for, how the program was made, now we're going into the actual application walkthrough. So to begin, it is found, the program landing page is found on our website at preservewa.org. You would click programs, you would click grants, you would click feeders. From there, you'll see 3 big buttons that has all the resources that you would need. First is the guidelines and procedures packet. It's basically everything I said here tonight in written form so that you have for your quick reference. You can print it out or you could just have it saved on your computer for a quick reference. The full application prompt is also in the guidelines packet for your preparation. There isn't really room for you to type or write in your answers, but it's just so that you have a list of every single prompt so that you know what to prepare for. And then link to other resources like DAHP or the National Park Service for their Secretary of Interior standards and historic theater preservation guides. Then on that page, you'll also see the online application form. This is the final application form, the final place in which you would put all your information, all your uploads, all your writing prompts into it and click submit. On that page, there is also a save and continue feature, which provides a link that lasts up to 30 days. Now, the link or the save and continue feature has worked for some people, but use it at your own risk. Personally, I recommend having a separate Word document in which you type everything out, and then when you're ready to submit, you would copy and paste everything into the final online application form. That's what I think is the safest because you have your own copy saved over here. Because sometimes the save and continue feature, it gets lost in the cloud, and we have to ask the form software people to provide it to us. So really use it at your own risk. It is there, but just be careful. Office hours offer face-to-face assistance with me again, where it's more of a back and forth where you can ask me about specific questions. I'll have those open and anyone can basically walk in or log in. But if you have specific questions at any time during the application process, don't hesitate to call or email, and I can respond directly as well. The dates for those office hours will be basically every other Wednesday from here till the application deadline. So that's November 3rd, 17th, and December 3rd at 4 to 5 p.m. on Zoom. And then, of course, a recording of this workshop that we're having here tonight will be posted on YouTube and embedded on that program landing page. So for the people here tonight, feel free to say hi in the chat or say hi to the Zoom on YouTube. And then just for your reference, I'll show you what the application page looks like. So you go here and then click Historic Theater Grant Program. And then, like I said, guidelines and procedures, online application form, future Zoom office hours, and then the video for tonight's workshop will be posted here. Okay, and then so now we're going to go through each application prompt. So the first 3 sections is pretty clear. It's going to be property information like address, then owner information about who owns the property. Is it an individual? Is it a nonprofit? Is it a commercial enterprise? Then applicant information. If you are not the owner, you would say who you are as the applicant, and then you also make sure that the owner is aware of the program requirements. So if you're applying on behalf of the owner, you're going to need to tell them that they have to be willing to sign that preservation agreement, that file that preservation easement with the county, and also keep up to date with us throughout the program period. And then obviously, if you have that authorization, you would need to obtain and upload an authorization letter or email. This could just be a simple message that says, I so-and-so authorize this person to be an applicant for my program or for my theater in order to get this grant program. Then you will need to provide a building description in section 4. This is when the application gets a little bit longer and gets a little bit more interesting as well, because this is the part where you begin to really show off your theater and your project. So you'll need to know the date of the theater construction if you know it, or just an estimate based on historic documents around the theater. I'm sure each theater owner knows either the actual construction date or the general year. Like, oh yeah, this is a 1920s theater. The general seating capacity, if you don't know the exact, even though I'm sure most of you do, just an estimate. Historic use, like tell us what kind of historic theater programming was there. Was it film? Was it live? Was it orchestras? Was it a public theater for community events? Was it a historically Black theater or any kind of other minority or ethnicity for special programming? Was it any kind of historic information that might be good for us to know so that we understand its cultural and historic significance of it, its current use. And you want to be honest here, like if it's not used as a theater, tell us what it is used for, like even if it's for storage or for seldom board meetings or rental space, but say that you will also be looking into restoring it for theater use and public use if that's the truth, because we want to support continued and active use of theaters as theaters. And then historic or cultural significance. Tell us, if has anything important happened at the theater, or if this theater was like the only place available for public meetings for 30 years or something like that. I understand each theater has, kind of the local lore of its own. So definitely tell us about it here. There's room for that. Historic designation, that's if it's on local, state, or national register. And if you have questions about its eligibility or its listing status, reach out to Michael Hauser or Holly Borth at the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. You can find their emails on the DAHP webpage, which is provided in all of the application materials, or you can just ask me to ask them for you. And then finally, if there's any other restrictions, like if you are in a loan or a mortgage or any other covenants or easements that we should know about in case there is a conflict with the potential preservation easement. On the fifth section, you're going to be conducting a building assessment. So basically you want to take this list on a clipboard or whatever and walk around your theater and mark good, fair, or poor on each of the items. And I won't read the list out loud to you, but basically it's every single aspect of the theater, from the inside to the outside, to the theater elements like seating and staging. You just want to say what kind of condition is it in. Then there is an opportunity for a verbal description for the most impactful parts that you can explain. So once you get done with the multiple choice section, you would go down and say, so the most worst part of our building is the roof. It was damaged in a large storm 3 years ago, and it's been leaking ever since. That's when you can give some more context and detail about it. And then also provide theater maintenance and repair history. So just say if there's been any work done on the property in the past 5 or 10 years, you can tell us about any big repairs or big renovations that have been done throughout your time at the theater. In section 6, this is based on section 5, so you've outlined the worst and best parts of your theater. In section 6, you're going to want to develop your project around the worst parts, because those are the ones that need the most attention. So if you mark poor or failing for the roof, we want to see building type 1, shell and structure, that you want to address the leaking roof first. Here, you're going to divide your project into these phases or these work types. You don't have to select all of them. You can choose 1, what you're able to afford within the next 2 years, or 2, what you're able to have time for to do in the next 2 years. So those are the 4 work categories that I mentioned earlier: building shell and structure, theater features, building systems and utility, and accessibility improvements. Then for each work type that you select within the application form, when you select any of the 4 work types, there will be a pop-out for more prompts respective to those work types that ask for a description, a timeline, and a cost. Once you fill all of those out, all of the costs will be calculated into the project total cost section automatically so that you know in total what does this whole project looks like. It's a $25,000 roof, it's a $25,000 seating and stage, and it's a $25,000 foundation repair. Overall, it's a $75,000 project. And then from that number, it's up to you to decide what the grant request is, up to, if you're in a distressed or rural population, up to 75% of that. Or if you're in one of these bigger, more actively supporting cities, then only 50% of that, up to $50,000. And like I said, I'm saying a lot of numbers really quickly. If you have any specific follow-up, I'd be glad to address them with you directly. Then in section 7, after you find out what your project cost is and you break it down into sections and you know how much the grant request is, then you fulfill the match section. And basically this is where you put in how much out-of-pocket expense is going to be contributed on your side, which is 25 to 50% usually. Any in-kind labor with a minimum of 25% an hour for general volunteers, if someone's cleaning up the property or cleaning debris, or you got community members to come in and paint and it doesn't require professional labor, then you would bill that at $25 an hour and you have to fill out this worksheet. Or if you are, let's say you have a local carpenter in town and they really support your theater and they're willing to do all of the labor for free, you can still use that match up to their market rate, but it wouldn't count as reimbursable expense. The reimbursable expense, as I mentioned earlier, is only for true cash expenditures towards direct hard costs of the construction materials or labor. And then just some extra prompts. You'll explain the experience and qualifications of the contractor or program manager. Like, I've been the buildings maintenance manager for this property for the past 10 years, and I facilitated the restoration back in 2012. I'm hiring this contractor that has worked with historic theaters in this city and this town, and they have 20 years of experience. You just want to talk up yourself and your related contractors here, just to develop some trust and some readiness to proceed if your project is selected. And then the financial need, explain why this grant funding is needed, what would be the limitations of it. So let's say we really need the roof to be restored within the next year, or else we'll permanently go out of business. Or, hey, we have enough money to do the foundation repair, but if you help us fund this roofing, then we'll also have some extra money left over to do the windows that also need attention. So just explain the financial need and circumstance of your theater and program. And then the public benefit aspect that I mentioned, because this is utilizing state dollars from the state capital budget through the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, you'll also need to explain how your theater interacts with the public. Bare minimum, is it located in the heart of a downtown, or is it tucked back in an abandoned, neglected corridor or something? That kind of information is good for us to know, but also public engagement, and I use the word public here in general, like people in your town, in your city, how are they using the theater? Even if it's for ticketed events, that's okay. Just tell us how many people go through the theater. Is it, once per month you have a single showing just because that's the capacity of staffing that you have? Or is it an active theater where pre-COVID times you had 3 showings every night? So just tell us how many people go through your theater per year or per month. Long-term maintenance, you'll want to describe future plans here, if we're able to get this roof or foundation repaired within the next 5 years, we're also looking to replace all the seating, or we'll be able to turn our attention to expanding our programming. We're looking to repair the wallpaper or the frescoes, all kinds of information about how this project will enable future preservation and use of your theater building. Then you'll also want to explain how has COVID-19 pandemic impacted your theater's operations, venues, or visitorship. Like I said, we've known that theaters have been important for the past few decades, and then it was highlighted first in 2008 with the survey, but then we either didn't have the attention or the capacity or the funding to give it more attention at that time. But COVID-19 really showed that theaters are hurting. They are a heart of a community. So through this, kind of additional survey prompt, tell us how you've been impacted. If your doors have closed, if your capacity was reduced to 10%, the kind of answers that you provided will allow us to use as testimony for asking for additional expansion of the program in 2023. And then lastly, any additional information that you think would be keen for the staff to know, or for the Historic Theater Advisory Council, the selection committee to know, just to give any other context as to why your theater is important and why your project proposal is good enough for funding. Attachments. These are the things that are not in the application, the online application form that you'll attach at the end. So this is going to be photos, documents, contractor bids, conditions assessments, historic surveys, nomination forms. On the screen here, you'll see the minimal requirements, and there's a checklist that you can use when you print or save the guidelines and procedures packet. So just make sure that you have all of these items saved in a folder, and then when you're ready to submit the application, you could all upload it at once instead of scrambling through different folders throughout the years. Like you'll go into your 2019 budget folder and go to February and then go to the photos folder. Certainly you can do that, but I recommend that you have it all in one place based on your preparation using the checklist. And then finally, section 10, we made it. Certification submission. This is just I'm ready to submit. All my information is accurate and true. And this is my point of contact email so that we can send you back a copy of your full application so that you remember what you submitted. Oh, finally, an intermission. So now that we walked through what the program was made for and how it got developed and its criterions and requirements, then we understood what goes into the application preparation. So let's say you submit the application, and then now it's time for the advisory council or the selection committee to make their decision. And they would go through this evaluation criterion. So that's significance, theatric use, urgency and relevance, preservation, relevancy, public benefit, contribution, like, community contribution, equity and accessibility. Are you approaching, all as a diverse group of Washingtonians as you can? Geographic distribution. There is some room to give more attention to places and jurisdictions that are more rural or from the far sides of the state that we don't hear from very often. Economic recovery. Will this grant project make or break your theater's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic? And while we offer a preliminary scoring for these items just to help the committee make a faster deliberation, there's still some deliberation involved on the day of the selection committee. So it's not, just hard and fast numbers. There will be a deliberation process talking about your application in a holistic and a ranked way. So that isn't the intermission period for this presentation. I just meant that as your time to relax and say, "Ooh, I submitted my application. Now it's in the hands of the selection committee. I'll wait it out for 2 months to find, or 1 or 2 months to find out if I get selected, and then finally, the last act of tonight's presentation is up to you, all the people watching and all the people that will be applying. You get to decide who's going to apply, who's going to be selected. Will funding return for the 2023-2025 budget? These are things that requires your input in partnership with us here at the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, as well as the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. We're all here because we love theaters and we know how important they are to a community, and we're able to use state funding to show that support. But really now it's up to you to apply, to not be shy or afraid to ask for help, and hopefully it gets actualized to the program. And then if you don't get selected, and you support and believe in the program and believe that it needs to continue, help us request additional funding for that next biennium cycle. So here I'll end it, reminding you that the deadline is December 19th at midnight on a Sunday, and then we'll deliberate over the holiday and New Year, and you'll see us back in January with announcements, and February with contracting. So we're returning to the original slide, and I will open it up for any questions. We have a little bit of time left within this hour, so feel free to turn on your cameras, turn on your mics, and I am glad that you're here with me.